Hello everyone, my name is Melody Rachel and this is You Know I. Today my guest is Zoe Booth. She's the Community Engagement Officer at Quillette, which is an online journal promoting free thinking and challenging mainstream ideas. Today we discuss Zoe's political arc and how she went from being a vegan feminist to a meat-eating, Jordan Peterson-loving, heterodox idea person. We recorded this 3 weeks ago. And these were the opinions we had at the time. Will they change? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, we're all still learning, right? But these are the opinions we had at the time, and I thought it made for a really interesting conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. This is Zoe Booth. All right, Zoe Booth, welcome to You Know I.
Thanks. Keen to be here.
So when we were in our early 20s, we were both surrounded by people who were entrenched in political correctness and being like a vegan or environmentalism, which none of those things are bad, but I'm concerned a lot of the people that we were surrounded by sort of used those things as weapons and sort of say, you're a bad person, I'm good because I'm using a paper straw and you're using a plastic straw.
Well, I did that. That was me. I was one of those people.
I want to know in what point of your life did you have these beliefs?
Well, let's go back to the start. I started getting interested in philosophy and, the big life questions pretty young, actually. I was always a very curious kid, but around age 12, 13, I was on Tumblr and I had a pretty active Tumblr blog. And I don't know how, but I just started coming across content about like Marxism, communism, feminism.
When you were 13?
Yeah, I don't really know what I was feeding the algorithm to get that content, but I was interested in it. Like I grew up in my parents are curious, intellectual people, and my intro to it was that they're agnostic, not like openly militant atheists, but I knew that my parents weren't squares, maybe. And that was probably my first intro into it. So maybe I was coming across that content, like atheist stuff.
And how did that draw out into your experience as like a young adult in your 20s? Because a Marxist?
Well, I would never say I was like a Marxist activist, but I definitely believed in that capitalism was wrong and inherently evil, and that in order to have a happy, healthy society where people were equal, we would need to overthrow capitalism. Now, I was 15. I probably stopped believing that in my early 20s, and it was sort of a slow progression where I started realizing that a lot of these beliefs weren't really realistic and weren't even something we should aspire to.
You were surrounded by people that had these beliefs as well, and did you used to sort of just used to go off each other like, yeah, we're anti-capitalist?
Well, no, actually, because I grew up in a small town on the outskirts of Newcastle at a big public school, and most people there were the children of, just very middle-class children. A lot of their parents were tradespeople. My parents were teachers, and I felt that I was one of the more like intellectually curious kids at my school. So no one in my year was really interested in what I was interested in these ideas. And actually they would tell me to shut the fuck up like all the time. They'd be like, you are so fucking annoying. Like, why do you care so much about these issues? Why do you care about equality? So now it's funny to see that it's like in the mainstream sort of zeitgeist to care about these issues. But when I started caring about them, it definitely was not cool to care about social justice.
It wasn't on the forefront of everyone's mind, I would say, when we were teenagers, because we didn't really have social media in the way they had it now. Like maybe I'm just completely different to you. I didn't know what feminism or capitalism was until I was like 22.
Yeah.
Years old. It just wasn't talked about in school. Feminism, it just wasn't these ideas just weren't present. But when you got to uni, where did you go to uni?
Newcastle Uni.
Newcastle Uni. Well, would you say more people had these sort of ideas?
So I started meeting people who were more interested in those issues. I met them online. and they were older than me, and a lot of them lived in Sydney or all around the world, really. By the time I was in high school, I was already meeting with some of these people, and often they were older men, which is a whole other story. But by the time I got to uni, I had met some more people who were interested in, social justice. And then at uni, obviously we're older and the culture's changed a little bit, and more people are interested in it. And I become more surrounded in real life with people who are interested in social justice issues. Yeah.
And when we say social justice, we're talking about equality. Feminism is in there. What else is?
Well, vegetarianism, veganism, environmentalism. What else? Yeah, it was like a whole suite of opinions and ideologies that you if you followed one, you sort of had to follow the other. That's how it felt. And I think that's still how it is. Like, I got interested in feminism, and then I realized, or I was told that, well, how can you be a real feminist if you're consuming milk? Because the, female cows are treated terribly because of their sex. They're imprisoned, they're impregnated, and they have their babies, can't you see, Zoe? It's all intersectional. So you can't do one without the other.
So you were pressured into becoming a vegan?
Yeah, pressured. Yeah.
And you believed that was the right thing to do to uphold your values as a feminist?
100%, because my naive opinion of the world and of human nature was that a human could be perfected, and that society could be perfected if we all just did the right thing and we all ate the right thing and believed in the right thing. We could live in this utopian universe.
Perfectionism, was that what you were searching for in your early 20s? Or to become good, and you were using all these as a way to achieve that?
Yes. So I think there are two things. One, like I am, it's cliche, but a perfectionist in the sense that I like to maximize everything that I do. I want a reason behind it, whether it's I'm sort of interested in biohacking and supplements and gym, and I've always been interested in getting, doing the right thing, the best thing in that sense. But also I think young women in particular, you sort of get social credit by being a good person, by being a virtuous, kind person. What do you think? Do you think that's...
I think so. Well, you made me think of, when you were saying supplements and stuff, you made me think about self-improvement.
Yes.
Wanting to better ourselves.
Yes.
That immediately I'm thinking that's a good thing. But when someone is an activist, and they're promoting things it's so weird because equality is a good thing.
Yeah.
Income inequality, equality between the sexes, but it comes across as virtuous because I see people attending protests, but they're not compassionate, they're not kind, they're not caring. So it's they're dressing up the outside, saying, "Oh yeah, I'm for the people," but they're often the most. It's the weaponization. Yeah, it's so bad. It's because obviously we both have benefited from feminism, but where it is today, I just remember I've got so many experiences. I was questioning it when I was about 23. I was like, oh, I don't know if I am a feminist. And just this lady that was sitting next to me was like, well, you have to be one if you're a woman. And I was just like, oh my God, I don't, someone needs to tell me what is this, because it's coming across as, this very external sense of morality instead of an internal sense of goodness. Yeah, I suppose I want to go back, and I'm more interested in that experience for you. Is that what you were hoping to achieve, an internal sense of goodness while pertaining to all these social justice ideas?
Yeah, I was internally motivated to be a good person, but also it's hard to separate that from the kudos and social credit that I was getting by publicly virtue signaling, essentially. And at the start, as I told you, it wasn't popular in my circles at school to talk about these issues, to care about them publicly. And I actually copped a lot of slack and hate for you know, getting on Facebook or MySpace or wherever I was talking about these issues. Or in person too, I'd like pull people up in class and stuff and say, you know, you can't say that, you shouldn't think like that, blah, blah, blah. But even if it was negative feedback from other people, it was still an identity that I was carving out, and I liked it, and it gave me some sort of power, I felt.
So how long, back to the veganism, how long were all your friends like vegan feminists?
God, no. At my school, no.
At uni?
At uni, yes, I started meeting more people who were, but in my close friendship group, no. Like most of my friends from uni grew up in rural, regional Australia. Like one of my best friends grew up on a dairy farm. I remember going to her dad's house, her parents' house, and saying that I was a vegan and he was a dairy farmer. And yeah.
How long were you vegan for?
I really struggled with veganism. I cut out milk and stuff for a few years and only ate eggs very occasionally. Strict veganism was only like 6 months, and vegetarianism 3 years maybe.
When you were doing it, did you really believe that you were doing the right thing?
Yes. And whenever I felt like breaking it and eating something naughty or haram, it was so weird. I'd like watch Forks Over Knives or one of those other vegan propaganda films to sort of radicalize myself, you know, like hypnotize myself.
So interesting. I can kind of line that up with religion
100%.
in terms of like eating meat is a sin or lying is a sin, must not eat meat to uphold a sense of morality. Tell me more about your journey as like a feminist.
That's an interesting one because like I grew up in a pretty progressive house and didn't have many gender norms. I could do whatever I wanted in my house, you know, like, and I was, you know, I dressed up as a princess and Batman and whatever, but I was always a very feminine girl, and I was always, you know, in my own way. And I did dancing. I was a ballet dancer, and I was very comfortable with my body. And once I got to, you know, the age of puberty and sexual development and stuff, I realized I was interested in boys very, very, like quite early. And I didn't see that there was anything to be ashamed of because I grew up in such a secular household and there were no like religious, you know, there was no shame attached to it. And I was very confident with boys and very comfortable talking with them. And I could see that they liked me and that made me feel good. But at the same time, I felt a weird tension between, I actually remember talking to my dad about this. I must have been like 13 or something. And I said, Dad, I feel this pressure to be sexy. Like that's something that's prized. But also if I show any sort of sexiness, I'm essentially slut shamed, as we'd say today, by girls at school. So I felt this weird tension. I didn't know how to be in terms of my sexuality. And through feminism, I came across feminism, and that sort of gave me a sense of empowerment. Like any negative feelings about my sexuality, I could just sort of say it's the patriarchy or it's those women, they're internally misogynistic, things like that.
Do you still think some of those things are true though?
Yeah. Definitely. There's a grain of truth to almost everything. And yeah, 100% like feminism has a lot of good things to it. And I'd still identify as a feminist. I just have some issues with, you know, feminism as it is today, like liberal feminism.
What made you like reconsider some of those views when you were at uni?
So some moments I can remember are like I was part of all these feminist groups on Facebook. There was one called Babes of Newcastle. There were all these babes of groups, and they were sort of like this radical feminist collectives online on Facebook. And the conversations in there started getting more and more censorious. The moderators would be like, girls, we need to put a trigger warning on these types of posts, this, that. And it started getting more and more ridiculous. And I'd sort of joke with my friend who was also in the group. We'd say, don't you think it's getting a bit wild? And then it came to a stage where they wanted to create a whole new group to like weed out the infidels, I suppose. And in order to get into the new group, we had to fill out this questionnaire. And if we didn't follow it out, like if we didn't answer the questions correctly, we wouldn't be let in. And the questions were like, are you pro-abortion? Yes or no? And I was sort of like, well, there's a lot of shades of grey. Late-term abortion, it gets a bit more, squirrely.
Right. Okay. I had a similar experience with a gay group, to be let into like a gay Facebook group in New Zealand. This is actually quite recently, but the first question was, are trans woman?
Oh my God.
And I'm just like, it's not that I don't necessarily believe that, or I have, it's not even about what my opinion is about that.
Yeah.
It's the fact that there is a right and wrong answer to that.
Yes.
And if you don't have the right answer, then we're going to exclude you.
Yes.
And which is kind of funny because the LGBT are all about love and inclusion. Yet if you have a disagreement on certain topics, then you're automatically excluded. And I understand they do that to try create a quote unquote safe space for everyone, but there needs to be some sort of allowance for disagreement and alternative opinions, because that's disagreement and things that make us feel uncomfortable help build us up to endure things later in life, which is...
So I had the exact same issue, that it was, you either believe in it, or if you don't, you're a bigot and you're not included in this group. And I've always been taught to question everything, and that was like part of my identity. And yeah.
So you didn't get into the group?
I didn't even try to. I was like, fuck this. Like, if this is what your stupid group is, then I don't want to be part of it anyway.
What were some other things, like other moments that happened after that made you rethink where you were at in terms of your political views, and just where you were at in that time in your life?
Another big thing was learning about evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, and why humans have developed to have certain behaviors or characteristics over time. And I can't remember how I first came across those topics, but I didn't even know that. Like, my belief was that every bad thing that we did, for example, racism or sexism or anything else, eating animals, it was all just because society made us do so. And all we need to do is change society, and we could just perfect these, fix these issues. And then I started to realize that, well, human beings are animals. And like all animals, we've developed certain traits and behaviors over time to survive. And it doesn't mean that they can't be improved, but we're less perfectible than I thought.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other big thing, which is related, was I came across Jordan Peterson.
Wait, one more question before we get into Jordan Peterson. You've also made me think of this sort of social constructionist theory, post-structuralist sort of blank slateism, which essentially means there's no human nature.
We're just a blank slate.
Things are put onto us.
Yeah.
Gender was a big thing. Or gender is completely socially constructed. Would you say that was like a dominant belief as well when you were in uni? And did you believe that?
Oh, I remember getting into Facebook fights. There was one big one in particular with this girl who I was friends with at high school. We got into a massive fight about Caitlyn Jenner because it was the year that she was crowned or awarded Woman of the Year.
Yep.
So I think it was like 2015. And still up until that date, I was saying trans women are women. And if you don't believe that, you're a horrible, horrible, horrible person. And yeah. So
what was your friend's stance?
That gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
Oh, wow.
And I found that extremely offensive, which is so weird to think about now, because obviously I think gender dysphoria was in the DSM, was listed. I'm not sure if it is now, but I just saw that if you ask ChatGPT whether gender dysphoria is a mental illness, it tells you that it isn't. And that's the sort of politically correct opinion.
Yeah, I spent a couple hours on ChatGPT the other day, and they have a certain political leaning.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was thinking about this the other day as well. Perhaps I think I was on Clementine Ford's Instagram, and
you're brave.
Yeah. Well, I've read her book, and
I used to love her.
Boys Will Be Boys, and she made a lot of good points, but she's definitely quite on the extreme end of feminism, sort of leaning towards man bashing.
Yeah.
Which is the feminist movement gets a lot of flack for that, but it's actually a very loud minority that are like that. Yeah, I was surrounded by people that were like, yeah, Clementine Ford. And I just remember reading a book and feeling like, man, this is so depressing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, this faction of feminism sort of tells women that we're victims of this tyrannical society. And there was something in me that didn't believe that. And I think people around me were just way more, they were extremely victimized. And I was just like, whoa, like it's a lot, but I don't know why I thought like that. And I always felt bad for thinking that way. Can you relate?
I never felt bad about it.
Okay.
I felt completely justified in my thinking that patriarchy was all around me all the time. In every social situation I entered into, it would be there. And it really was a bit of a dark cloud over me. I wasn't depressed, but I had this sort of bitterness and anger. Like I still had great relationships. I've always had great relationships with men. I've had nice boyfriends and stuff, but it was always there. I'd always have to make a joke about, you know, typical of like some old man to do that. And I was pretty bitter. And even my dad, like I have a really good, rare relationship with my dad and that it's so good. But around that time, I did start to look down on him a little bit, like, oh, you're just an old conservative man, even though he wasn't conservative at all.
It just maybe seems that way compared to the people you were around.
Exactly.
What helped you take a more moderate approach to feminism?
Yeah, learning about evolutionary psychology and seeing that feminists would turn on me made me start to question the culture or the movement. And then, yeah, Jordan Peterson. So around that time, we'd have to go back and see exactly when that video blew up. That
Kathy Newman interview?
Yeah, I think probably around 2015 or 16.
I thought it was 2018.
Yeah, maybe even later. Yeah, I was definitely still at uni. Anyway, and I remember watching that and I was just physically revolted. Like I was shaking. I was having it sounds so funny, but I was so upset by it. I was like sweating. It really got to me.
Isn't he upset you?
Yes, what he was saying in that video, I found it so controversial. I'd never heard anything like it before. So he was saying that, I think he was talking about the gender pay gap and that there's a reason why it exists.
It's not just sexism. It's like 100 different things.
Yeah. And I think he was asking her, well, why do you wear makeup in the office? Or why do you wear high heels and blah, blah. And I knew all these things about, like, I knew why I wore makeup. I knew why I wore a short dress. I just couldn't at that time. I didn't admit it. I didn't feel comfortable admitting it to myself.
Why did you wear makeup and a short dress?
Because I wanted to look good, because I liked people, men and women, thinking I looked hot. And I thought I looked hot and I wanted to have that identity mirrored back to me, because that's what we all want deep down, I think. But the belief at the time, and what many women still believe today, is, yeah, I'm wearing this short dress and this dress that shows my cleavage, but I'm doing it for me. But if you really examine that, like, what do you mean you're doing it for you? I don't shave my legs, for example, or I don't wax my legs, but some women go through, you know, quite a painful, expensive procedure to remove their leg hairs. Now, I don't think they do it for them. You can't really.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one, because men expect that of us, but two, it's sort of like a cultural norm.
It's a cultural norm.
We quite often don't want to stand out. We want to fit in.
Of course, that's normal to want to fit into some cultural norms, or you signal, for example, by dyeing your hair blue or piercing your septum or growing your leg hair out, you're signaling to the world, fuck your cultural norms, but you're still signaling. Everything we do is signaling. Everything.
Yeah, that makes it sound like
do it for me.
We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything for ourselves. We're doing it to change people's perception of us.
Exactly. So cultivating.
Yeah, man, that's really confronting. Okay, so what Jordan Peterson was saying in the interview, that the gender pay gap isn't necessarily real, women wear makeup to attract men, and a bunch of other things. And you were offended by that?
Yes.
What happened after that? Because now you've grown to love Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I guess there was like an interim period, and I guess I can't remember it very well, but he must have prompted me to really look into it more, and I just ended up getting swayed. Like, there was no arguing against him. Like, what he was saying was objectively true. It's not that, you know, a female bank teller gets paid $10 less an hour. Like, I was studying law. I knew that you couldn't discriminate. You couldn't pay a woman less just because she's a woman. And also I was studying politics at uni, politics and international relations. And I really remember I wrote this essay it was about Marxist feminism. And I remember being in the uni reading a book, and it went through pretty much every job. In every job, aside from, I think, like sex work and modeling, men get paid more. So even if you're a gardener or a cleaner or a chef or anything, in the end, men just end up getting paid more. And I found that very interesting, because I knew that legally they weren't getting paid more. It was just that they were in the profession for longer because they didn't have kids, because they worked more hours, because they were more willing to risk things, be aggressive, go for that promotion, work more. Even if you're a fucking gardener, it's just what ended up happening.
And the studies don't take into consideration women taking maternity leave.
Yeah.
That's really, I mean, that argument goes back and forth. People say, oh, well, you know, women won't apply for a job if they've got, you know, 8 attributes, but a male will apply for it if he's got like 4 attributes. I sort of wonder, is the better approach to teach women to be more assertive instead of teaching men to just hire more women because they're women?
Definitely. I would agree that we should be fostering assertiveness in young women, keeping in mind that naturally it just doesn't present itself as much in women, but we need to admit that there are personality differences between the sexes, and there are very assertive women like myself, I would say, but the majority of women simply aren't as assertive or aggressive, which is related.
Do you think that's why they create these sort of regulations or parameters to counter our biological instinct? Because I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about like men catcalling you. And I thought about it, and I was like, oh man, like I don't want to lash out because I don't want him to feel embarrassed. That's so weird. He's just shamed me, dehumanized me, but I don't want to do it back to him. And is that like a natural female thing because we have more empathy?
More empathy, and also we know inherently that if you were to infuriate that man, he could really hurt you.
Right.
So that's why we're more agreeable, because we have to be, because throughout history, we haven't been able to fight back with our physicality. We've had to convince them with words.
And is this where we come back to evolutionary biology?
Yes.
So our temperaments are a sort of a protection mechanism.
Exactly. So we have strengths and weaknesses, just as men do. And I really think that the world would be a better place, and that society would be better if we all knew more about evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, and I sometimes think the social constructionist theory is trying to do the same thing. It's trying to eliminate inequalities. Did we get to, you were offended by Jordan Peterson, then you realized some of the stuff he was saying was true, and then what happened after that?
That probably started the ball rolling, you know, like I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but around that time I moved to Spain. So I was with my ex, who was Spanish, and I moved there. And that probably had a lot to do with it too, just being out of the culture, out of my little bubble, living in a country that hadn't been touched or affected so much by like woke ideology, as we'd call it. Living in a country that worked pretty well, and the culture had been thriving over like centuries, and was more traditional though in some ways. And I came to appreciate that tradition and saw the beauty in that. And I didn't see the women as oppressed at all, but they weren't constantly talking about the patriarchy. They seemed to be living. Now, a lot of Spanish feminists would criticize me for that and say there's a lot of issues, which of course there are.
Are the women there like similar though? Do you still have like your tomboys and your feminine?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Your strong-headed woman and
yeah. Like I think Spanish women are very strong, opinionated women and they're great. Like I haven't seen anything. People say there's machismo there, but I mean, there's a bit of machismo everywhere.
Okay. And when you came back to Australia, you started working with a company called Think Inc., which sort of promotes, would you say like heterodox values? Which are, what are heterodox values?
Well, heterodox means not orthodox, and the orthodox of today is all the correct things that you have to parrot on, like, you know, trans women or any other, you know, we're all 100% equal. And if there's any inequality, it's because of society, you know. But yeah, the reason I came to work for Think Inc. was while I was in Spain and sort of having this change, evolution happen, I came across Claire Lehman, who I now work for at Quillette. And I found her just completely groundbreaking. Like, not only was she Australian, she was a woman, she was young, she was beautiful and extremely intelligent and extremely brave. And I was feeling like politically homeless for a long time. And I found her and she gave me some strength. And through her, I found Susie, who runs Think Inc. And when I came back to Australia, I sort of reached out to both of them and ended up working for Susie first and meeting Claire. And now I work for Claire. So
now you work at Quillette. So Quillette is it's an online magazine that promotes free thinking, rational thought. It feels like our freedom of thought and speech is sort of being squandered a little bit by these extreme social justice orthodox ideas. I don't know. What's one of your favorite things about Quillette?
I mean, working with Claire is great. She's not only a boss, but a mentor and a friend in many ways. And it's just amazing to, you know, be sitting next to her every day, just bouncing ideas off her. Lately I'm really enjoying like the business side of things. I'm the community manager. So my main goal is to like increase our subscriptions and increase our brand awareness. And that's just been so fun. Like, she gives me free rein, essentially. I can experiment with new methods of promoting our brand and spreading the word. And obviously I'm really passionate about our product. So
I feel like Quillette's beneficial to society. How?
Well, I think the main service it provides right now is that the culture's changed. The world's caught up and has realized that the far left was or still is suppressing free thinking and freedom of speech. And now I think the average person knows that. The average person is familiar with the term woke and cancel culture. So when Claire founded Quillette in 2015, the average person didn't really know about what was happening in academia or in publications. So now the world's like caught on and everyone knows about it, and that's great. And we still do a lot of, like, we publish a lot of voices. We platform people who, you know, criticize the left. But I think the pendulum swung so far that the right has become censorious as well, and just as bad as the left in many ways, and very Puritan. And
how is the right censorious?
So in terms of like freedom of expression, like sexuality, that extreme conservatism, like, I'm not a conservative. I want to conserve some things that the far left wanted to throw out. So in that sense, I'm conservative, but I'm pretty centrist and run of the mill. And so is Claire and most of the people who work at Quillette. So the far right, for example, they would probably judge me heavily for wearing a bikini and posting bikini photos online, or having sex before marriage, or the fact that you're gay and, you know, live with your girlfriend and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a big issue with teaching like CRT and queer theory. These are very American issues right now, but there's still issues in Australia. And there's a difference between teaching queer theory and teaching kids that being gay is okay, because it is okay to be gay. What's not okay is teaching kids, you know, that biology doesn't matter and that you can be whatever gender you want to be today. So you know what I mean? Like Quillette is in the middle and open-minded, and we're not conservative and religious and super right-wing, but we're also not promoting like queer theory. We're just promoting reasonable thought,
rational dialogue. And you quite often criticize the left and the right, as well. But your Quillette as a publication has been criticized as being right wing,
100%. Yeah,
but that's usually what extreme left wing people will say about any idea that they disagree with. Same with the right. It can really get quite polarizing, eh? Mm-hmm. I had some really quite radical social justice friends. I think I got really reprimanded by using Germaine Greer in a interview that I did. I just like, oh yeah, Germaine Greer thinks this. And they're like, oh, well, you can't mention her because she has negative opinions about trans people. And I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't quoting those negative opinions. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with the negative opinions, but I like what she's done for feminism. But how do you explain what it is?
I lose so much respect. I just think it's that's not a good criticism of you. Like, oh, you can't listen to so-and-so or read so-and-so's book because she's a TERF because blah, blah. It's like, no. You don't get to tell me what I can listen or read. I can read whatever I want to and I'll make up my own mind. And so firstly, don't hang out with people who or spend time reading the opinions of people who like believe there's such a clear, like
morally upright person.
Yeah. And have friends and conversations with lots of different people. Don't hang out just in the arts world, with all the theatre kids or all the art school kids or all the church kids. Like, I think a big issue is spending too much time online, which I'm definitely guilty of. But there are people out there who are far worse at that, and they just spend all their days in online echo chambers.
Well, the algorithm feeds back our own beliefs to us,
radicalizing them on both the right and the left, and it's so dangerous. Like, go out there, talk to your grandma, talk to your neighbors. Like, the average person isn't obsessed with culture war stuff, and it's good to have a healthy interest in it, but don't let it consume you.
I think that's a really good place to end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Zoe Booth. Oh, where can we find you? Can we find you?
Yeah.
Should I link your Twitter in the show notes?
Sure. I'm on Twitter, Zoe Cabina, and Instagram at Zoe Kirani.
All right. I'll put that in the show notes.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. Next week, I'm up to episode 9. Wow. It's all moving very fast. All right. See you then.